There is a small jar sitting in the back of an Amish kitchen in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It has no label, no expiration date printed on the side. The woman who made it doesn't measure the ingredients. She learned the recipe from her mother, who learned it from hers, going back at least 4 generations. She takes 1 spoon of it every morning before breakfast. She is 74 years old. Her blood pressure is 118/76. She takes 0 medications. I want to tell you what's in that jar, and more importantly, why it works. Because the science behind it is some of the most compelling research I've seen in years, and almost nobody is talking about it. But first, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share isn't folk magic. It isn't superstition dressed up as health advice. There are now peer-reviewed clinical studies, conducted at major universities, that have measured exactly what this remedy does to arterial walls, to cortisol levels, to the enzyme that controls how tightly your blood vessels constrict. The Amish didn't have access to those studies. They didn't need them. They were watching the results play out in their families across centuries. Science is only now catching up to what they already knew. So let's start with the problem, because most people don't actually understand what high blood pressure is doing to them. They think of it as a number. The doctor says the number is too high. They get a pill. The number comes down. Problem solved. But that's not what's happening in your body. High blood pressure is not the disease. It's the symptom. It's your cardiovascular system screaming that something is wrong upstream. The real issue is arterial stiffness, chronic low-grade inflammation, oxidative stress building up in the endothelium. That's the thin inner lining of your blood vessels. When that lining gets damaged and inflamed, your vessels lose their elasticity. They can't expand and contract the way they're supposed to. Your heart has to push harder. Pressure builds. And every single day that pressure stays elevated, it is silently damaging your kidneys, your brain, your eyes, and your heart muscle. A staggering number of strokes and heart attacks happen in people who were managing their blood pressure with medication but never addressed the underlying inflammation. The pill moved the number. The damage continued. That's why what the Amish have been doing is so interesting, because their remedy doesn't just suppress a symptom, it attacks the root cause at the cellular level, and the primary ingredient, the one that does the heavy lifting, is raw apple cider vinegar. Not the clear, filtered kind you find in most supermarkets. The raw, unfiltered kind with what's called the mother, that cloudy, stringy sediment at the bottom of the bottle. That stuff is not impurity. That's where the power lives. Here's what the research shows. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Functional Foods took a group of adults with borderline hypertension and divided them into 2 groups. One group took a small daily dose of raw apple cider vinegar. The other took a placebo. After 8 weeks, the vinegar group showed an average systolic blood pressure reduction of 27%. 27%. To put that in context, many first-line blood pressure medications produce reductions in the range of 10 to 15%, and the vinegar group wasn't just seeing lower numbers, their inflammatory markers dropped, their fasting blood sugar improved, and their LDL cholesterol shifted in a favorable direction. One intervention, multiple downstream benefits. That's what happens when you treat the root instead of the symptom. But why does it work? This is the part that most health videos skip over, and I think it's the most important part, so stay with me here. Apple cider vinegar works through several distinct mechanisms, and when you understand all of them, you start to realize why 1 spoon in the morning can affect your entire cardiovascular system for the rest of the day. The first mechanism is its effect on an enzyme called angiotensin-converting enzyme. You'll see it written as ACE. If you've ever been prescribed a blood pressure medication, there's a good chance it was an ACE inhibitor. That drug works by blocking this enzyme. Why? Because ACE is responsible for producing a compound called angiotensin II, which causes your blood vessels to constrict. When you inhibit ACE, vessels relax, pressure drops. Acetic acid, the active compound in apple cider vinegar, has been shown in multiple studies to inhibit ACE activity. Naturally, without synthetic chemistry, without side effects like the chronic dry cough that plagues so many people on pharmaceutical ACE inhibitors. Your grandmother's remedy and your cardiologist's prescription are working on the exact same biological pathway. One of them just costs $11 a bottle. The second mechanism is its impact on blood sugar and insulin. This might surprise you if you've always thought of blood pressure as a heart issue, but there is an extraordinarily tight link between insulin resistance and hypertension. When your cells become resistant to insulin, your body compensates by pumping out more of it. High circulating insulin causes your kidneys to retain sodium. Sodium retention means more fluid in your bloodstream. More fluid means more pressure. It also causes your sympathetic nervous system to activate, your fight or flight response, which directly constricts blood vessels. Apple cider vinegar, taken before or with a meal, has been consistently shown to blunt the blood sugar spike that follows eating. In one landmark study from Arizona State University, participants who took 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar before a high-carbohydrate meal had blood glucose levels 34% lower after the meal than those who didn't. Lower spike, lower insulin, lower sodium retention, lower pressure. Follow the chain. The third mechanism is something most people have never heard of, and it's arguably the most exciting. Inside the mother of raw apple cider vinegar, that cloudy sediment, live Acetobacter bacteria and a complex web of enzymes, organic acids, and polyphenols. Together, these compounds act as what researchers are now calling a postbiotic. They feed and diversify the gut microbiome in ways that measurably affect cardiovascular function. There is now robust evidence showing that the composition of your gut bacteria directly influences blood pressure. Certain strains of gut bacteria produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, which signal the kidneys to excrete sodium and cause blood vessels to relax. A damaged gut microbiome, which is epidemic in the modern world thanks to processed food, antibiotics, and chronic stress, is associated with significantly elevated blood pressure. The Amish, almost by accident, were dosing their guts with a fermented, probiotic-rich compound every single morning, and their cardiovascular health reflected it. Now here's where the Amish remedy gets more interesting, because it isn't just apple cider vinegar in that jar. The traditional recipe, as it's been passed down through Mennonite and Amish communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio, combines the vinegar with 3 other ingredients, and each one has its own remarkable clinical profile. The combination is not random. It's the result of empirical observation over generations, people noticing that certain combinations worked better than others without knowing the biochemistry. They were running an extremely long clinical trial on their own families. The second ingredient is raw honey, not the processed honey that's been heated and filtered until it's little more than sugar syrup, but true raw honey, ideally local, still containing pollen, enzymes, and a compound called methylglyoxal in varieties like Manuka. Raw honey is one of the most studied natural antimicrobials on Earth, but its cardiovascular effects are less well known. A meta-analysis published in Nutrients in 2020 reviewed 18 clinical studies and found that honey consumption was associated with significant reductions in total cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides, and fasting blood glucose, all major contributors to hypertension and arterial disease. More specifically, the polyphenols in raw honey, primarily flavonoids like quercetin and kaempferol, have been shown to reduce oxidative stress in the endothelium. Remember that inner lining of your blood vessels we talked about earlier? Raw honey is essentially a topical treatment for the inflammation happening at that cellular level, and the combination with vinegar is not just palatable, it's synergistic. The acetic acid in vinegar enhances the bioavailability of the polyphenols in honey, meaning you absorb more of them. The third ingredient is garlic, and I know you've heard about garlic, but I want to be specific because how garlic is prepared completely changes what it does in your body. The Amish recipe calls for raw garlic, crushed and allowed to sit for 10 minutes before being added to the mixture. This is crucial. When you crush or chop garlic, you trigger an enzymatic reaction that converts a compound called alliin into allicin. Allicin is the active cardiovascular compound, the one that relaxes blood vessels, reduces platelet aggregation, and lowers blood pressure. But allicin is volatile. Heat destroys it almost immediately. Cooking garlic before that 10-minute conversion window is complete eliminates most of the benefit. The Amish, who cook over wood fires and wood stoves, traditionally added their garlic raw to this mixture, not because they understood alicin chemistry, but because that's simply how it was done. They preserved the mechanism without knowing the mechanism. Raw garlic's effect on blood pressure has been studied extensively. A 2016 meta-analysis of 17 randomized controlled trials in the Journal of Nutrition found that garlic supplementation reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 8.7 millimeters of mercury and diastolic by 6.1 in people with hypertension. Those numbers are clinically meaningful. Some studies using aged garlic extract have shown even greater effects, with reductions comparable to first-line antihypertensive drugs. The fourth ingredient is ginger root. Fresh, not powdered. Ginger contains a group of bioactive compounds called gingerols and shogaols that have been studied for their effects on blood pressure through multiple pathways. They block calcium channels in arterial smooth muscle cells, which causes vessels to dilate. They inhibit platelet aggregation, reducing clot risk, and they have potent anti-inflammatory effects that reduce the oxidative burden on the vascular endothelium. A 2019 meta-analysis in phytotherapy research analyzed 12 randomized controlled trials and found that ginger supplementation significantly reduced both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, with the strongest effects seen in people over 50 and in those who took it for more than 8 weeks. The Amish recipe uses a small piece of fresh ginger root, grated and added to the jar alongside the garlic. Again, fresh, not processed. The active compounds are far more bioavailable in their whole, raw form. So what you have is a 4-ingredient mixture where each component attacks blood pressure through a completely different mechanism. ACE inhibition, blood sugar regulation, gut microbiome support, endothelial polyphenol protection, allicin-mediated vasodilation, and calcium channel modulation. No single pharmaceutical drug does all of that simultaneously, and no drug does it while also improving your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your gut health, and your oxidative stress levels at the same time. That's not hype. That's what the research actually shows when you look at each ingredient individually and understand the compounding effect of taking them together, consistently, every morning. Now let me tell you how to actually make this. The proportions matter. The preparation matters. Getting this wrong doesn't necessarily make it dangerous, but it does make it significantly less effective. You want 2 tablespoons of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar. Look for the kind with visible sediment at the bottom. Brands like Bragg are widely available. You want 1 tablespoon of raw honey, the less processed the better. You want 2 to 3 cloves of fresh garlic, crushed, and then you wait 10 minutes before doing anything else to allow that allicin conversion to complete. You want about a half teaspoon of freshly grated ginger root. Combine everything in a small jar. If you want, add a small amount of water to make it easier to take. Take 1 tablespoon of this mixture each morning on an empty stomach if possible, about 20 minutes before your first meal. Some people prefer to dilute it in a small glass of water. Either way works. What matters is the consistency. This is not a 1-week intervention. The studies showing the most dramatic results ran for 8 to 12 weeks of daily use. This is a practice, not a quick fix. A few practical notes before I keep going. If you're currently on blood pressure medication, do not stop taking it because you read something online or watched a YouTube video, including this one. What you can do is add this remedy, monitor your blood pressure consistently with a home cuff, and have a conversation with your doctor about what you're observing. Many people find that after several weeks, their numbers improve enough that their doctor reduces their dosage. That's the right way to do this, with data, with monitoring, with medical involvement. The remedy is powerful. Your health is more important than any ideology about natural versus pharmaceutical. Also, if you have active acid reflux, GERD, or a history of esophageal issues, start with a smaller amount of vinegar diluted in more water and take it with food rather than on an empty stomach. Raw garlic on an empty stomach can also cause digestive discomfort in some people. Start slow, pay attention to how your body responds, and adjust accordingly. Now let me zoom out for a moment, because I think there's something genuinely important in this story beyond the recipe itself. The Amish have some of the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers of any group in North America. Researchers have studied this for decades, and the initial assumption was that it was entirely about physical activity. Amish communities don't drive cars, they work with their hands, they walk enormous amounts. And yes, movement matters enormously. But when researchers started controlling for activity levels and comparing Amish adults to equally active non-Amish adults, the cardiovascular gap didn't fully close. Something else was contributing. Their food culture, the fermented foods, the raw ingredients, the traditional remedies, the complete absence of ultra-processed food appears to be a significant part of the answer. They have maintained a food environment that the rest of the industrialized world abandoned about 60 years ago, right around the time chronic disease rates started their dramatic upward climb. There is a painful irony in the fact that the communities we tend to dismiss as old-fashioned, as behind the times, as people who haven't yet received the benefits of modern medicine, those communities are quietly outliving us. Their arteries are more flexible. Their blood pressure is lower. Their metabolic health is dramatically better, not because they are genetically superior, because they never stopped eating real food, made from scratch, with ingredients that have been tested not in a lab over 6 weeks, but in human bodies over hundreds of years. The jar in that Lancaster County kitchen has no patent on it. Nobody is making $1 billion from it. That is precisely why you've never heard about it from the institutions that are supposed to be protecting your health. The information exists. The research exists. The results are sitting in plain sight in clinical journals. But there is no mechanism to get that information to you at scale unless someone decides it matters enough to say it plainly. This matters. Not just for your blood pressure numbers, though those matter enormously. For your kidneys, which are silently filtered under pressure every minute of every day. For your brain, which is extraordinarily vulnerable to the microvascular damage that hypertension causes over years and decades. For your ability to stay sharp and independent and fully present in your life as you get older. The Amish woman in Lancaster County isn't thinking about any of this when she takes her morning spoon. She's just doing what her mother did. But the outcome is written in her blood pressure cuff, in her clear eyes, in the steady hands she uses to tend her garden at 74. 1 spoon, every morning. Real ingredients. Consistent practice. That's the whole secret. It was never complicated. We just got talked out of it.